Hello and welcome to the Discover History YouTube channel, and hopefully you are following our story going up to the 3rd of September 1651. In other words, the road to the Battle of Worcester. Now we've actually come to Upton upon Severn today, and you can see two iconic buildings known in Upton. The first one is the church behind me, which sits right on the bank of the River Severn next to the bridge, and that's often referred to as the Pepper Pot. It's worth going in there, by the way. There's a nice little exhibition in there. It's also the Tourist Information Centre. The other iconic building, a well-known landmark in Upton, is the Timber Frame building, which is actually the old Tudor House Heritage Centre or Museum. Really worth having a look in there, full of all sorts of curios basically. So today we're in Upton and we're filming on what is the 28th of August, and if we turn back the clock to 1651, you're probably now wondering what actually happened on the 28th of August 1651. Well, the interesting thing is Oliver Cromwell needed to own both sides of the River Severn. The main reason for this was to make sure there is no breakout of Scottish forces in Worcestershire. He doesn't want them fleeing to the west, in other words going to Wales, which is a well-known and traditional area for royalists, for example. He doesn't want them fleeing down to London, and he definitely doesn't want them going back up to Scotland and playing this cat and mouse game in the Highlands, for example. So Cromwell's ordered Lambert, the man who was shadowing the Scots down, to basically take the little village and the river crossing at Upton upon Severn. Now there's an interesting thing that happens. 300 Scottish and English royalists, handful of English by the way, occupy Upton. They actually dig some earthworks which you can still see today if you go and have a wander around Upton upon Severn. Very nice village by the way, really worth going to, especially on a lovely sunny day. And the interesting thing is they dig in and they relax. Now the funny thing is, because they know Cromwell is technically quite a long way away over at Evesham, they don't bother, and this is shocking, they don't bother putting any sentries on. They are reliant on the earthworks that they've dug and the fact they have dismantled the central span of the old medieval bridge. So technically they think they're going to have an easy time here in Upton, drinking and eating and sunning themselves, because what you have to remember is the weather up to the Battle of Worcester was pretty good. We know the night before the Battle of Worcester, even the dawn of the Battle of Worcester, there was a thunderstorm, typical like the ones we've had recently really, with the very high temperatures and the breaking with a thunderstorm at some point. So the Scots here and the English are occupying Upton, but they're very, very relaxed, and Cromwell has sent Lambert to take Upton. Now on the evening of the 27th, the parliamentarians, Lambert's force, occupy the high ground just outside the village, and they look into Upton and realise that the Scots are very relaxed with their defences here. They see the earthworks, they see the bridge has been removed, or the central span has been removed, but they are very, very relaxed. And by the morning of the 28th, Lambert looks in and realises that they are extremely relaxed, and he sends 18 dragoons. Now dragoons are mounted musketeers, so they are designed to fight on foot, but they ride horses, and those dragoons, 18 of them, rode silently into the outskirts of the area, dismounted in the typical way and moved in on foot. Now they realised that the Scots had put a plank over the bridge, mainly so they could come and go whenever they pleased. The problem was it was still in position when Lambert's troops got down to that bridge. We know at 10 o'clock they shimmied over the bridge. You can almost imagine them shimmying over the bridge, silently creeping over, and they then appeared in the middle of Upton. Now at some point that morning, one of the Scots must have noticed what was going on and fired, because we know there was a small engagement near the bridge. But the dragoons, being dragoons, heavily armed, they had a matchlock musket at the end of the day, maybe even doglocks, they were after all new model army, then ran inside the church behind. Now the church has changed slightly. You can probably see the scarring of where the nave was. The nave is completely gone now. It really consists of the tower. And at the top, there's a much more modern feature. But very simply, the dragoons entered the church. They would have slammed the door shut. They barricaded that door as they prepared that for defence. And what would have happened is the windows would have been broken and those dragoons would have shoved their muskets outside and started firing. By that point, at least the 300 of the garrison here, these Scottish and a handful of English royalists, would have then tried to have got them out of the church. So there would have been a fierce firefight in this area where we're actually filming from. And we know that at one point the Scots were pushing pistols through the window and pulling the trigger. In other words, shooting blindly into the church, hoping to hit someone. And we also know they set fire to the door to try and burn them out. And all this is happening at around about 10:30 on the 28th of August 1651. So we're now having a much more ferocious engagement. The first, really, even though we did have some skirmishing in onwards, this is probably the first ferocious fight, and this is all down to Cromwell wanting both sides of the river. Now, whilst this is going on, interesting fact, Lambert with the rest of his force are then crossing the river. They actually find a fording point, or a swimming point more likely, further downstream. They cross over, and whilst the Scots are all surrounding this church and the firefights going on in there with the dragoons inside, straight away the Scots realise coming through is a force of cavalry under the command of Lambert, the man that has shadowed them all the way from Stirling, really. There's a huge scrap, very short scrap though, a huge scrap in the grounds of the church next to the bridge, and it's at that point that the Scots decide there's an overwhelming group of enemy, that they decide to flee for Worcester. So they start heading out of Worcester. There's famously a final stand just outside the village, and at that point the man in charge of the garrison at Upton, famous man Edward Massey, is actually shot. And there's a famous quote about Massey here that I've wrote down. It is said that 40 carbines were shot at him within half a pistol shot, and we know Massey took major wounds. He took carbine wounds very similar to a musket used by cavalry, to the arm, the hand, and also the leg. Mortally wounded, to be fair. He never died, however. His men gathered him up, and whilst they were fleeing towards Worcester, they took him with them. Interesting fact, Edward Massey, very interesting man if you read about him, very good commander. Sadly plays no other part in the Battle of Worcester because of his injuries he sustained, basically. So he's away, the Scots are away. And very simple, Lambert orders or sends a rider back to the main force at Evesham, and orders, and this is the interesting thing, General Fleetwood to bring the Parliament army into Upton. And famously they do. They'd already started marching from Evesham anyway, to be fair. They knew Lambert would secure the crossing here. By the evening of the 28th, there was around about 12,000 predominantly new model army soldiers in the centre of Upton. Famously, they repaired the bridge, and even Oliver Cromwell paid them a visit. When Oliver Cromwell turned up, there's a famous quote about this one as well. It was said that he was greeted with abundance of joy and extraordinary shouting from his elated troops in Upton. So it was a victory, a great victory. Now Cromwell and the Parliament forces owned both sides of the River Severn, which is a very key and strategic thing to do. Later on you will see that in the Battle of Worcester. Another interesting point to note about this as well is Upton is often not given a great note really for the Battle of Worcester, and it's quite an important strategic engagement before the actual fight takes place, the Battle of Worcester that is. And I would advise you at some point, do come into Upton, have a little wander around and look out for these English Civil War sites that we have here. There's also, like I said, inside the church, a nice little exhibition. It's quite a nice little village to have a wander around really. So hopefully that's given you a bit of an insight in what was going on up to the Battle of Worcester in 1651. And remember, subscribe, stay up to date, and wait for the 3rd of September, because we have a treat installed for you on the 3rd of September. There's a lot of videos to go on, because we're going to take you through the battle step by step, every single hour, minute by minute, and so on. Anyway, as always, stay safe, keep socially distanced, wear a face covering if you're out shopping or in an confined space, and we'll see you soon. Bye bye.